few days ago, I did his podcast with Jason Wilson, and I thought it was very interesting. I was actually in Botswana when that actually occurred, and I was thinking these are the thoughts that I have about it. Father wounds cut deep, but it says father wounds cut deep, and the criticisms of a father have a major impact on men. We want approval from our fathers, and despite our great accomplishments, we are told in some way that we aren't enough or we're flawed, and we find ourselves overcompensating. And maybe one of the reasons why Cam is so great is because the cutting words of "you aren't disciplined enough" stuck with him. I know that feeling firsthand because my dad would say to me, "Your anger doesn't serve you well," or "you always need a pat on the back." And I found myself always keeping a cool head, even at times which I should have flipped out. Or in other times, I would always shun any words of praise or things like that because of how deep that my father's words had set in my spirit. But I realized Dad's words have a way of just ringing out in all those situations. In those experiences, it taught me to suppress expressing myself and being able to verbalize my anger in a healthy and a responsible way. The conversation that we saw with Jason Wilson and Cam Newton was a conversation he wanted to have with his father, but those old wounds pop up. And sons don't often realize that the fathers might also be dealing with their own father wounds that they haven't healed from, and let alone the wounds that even the sons can inflict on fathers. It can be difficult to have those conversations because of all the history, the hurt, and the pain. And we don't want to seem weak in front of the people that hurt us. And we don't want to seem weak in front of the people who we feel judged us for our weaknesses. It seems as almost if Cam was saying, if I can't get my father's approval despite my accomplishments, at least I can get beautiful women because of them. I can hear how great I am, even though what I've been asking for, what I've been begging for, is to hear that from my father. When we understand our own journey, we can have empathy in somebody else's hurt, compassion for their humanity, and understanding of their struggles, and patience for their shortcomings. And that's one of the things that Jason Wilson showed, was patience, empathy, and compassion, and understanding. It made more sense as the interview went on why Jason Wilson was calling him son in the interview, because he was literally taking the place of Cam's father. Even though Jason Wilson hadn't caused the pain, Jason Wilson was literally stepping into the place, and it reminded Cam of that pain that he experienced with his father. He was stepping in the place of Cam's father. But however, the ever-present words still rang true, but it was rejected because it came from a messenger who hadn't caused that hurt and hadn't made him feel unworthy and flawed, which made it difficult for Cam to receive those words. I think that the words were set in Cam's spirit. It's just now about watering those words. That interview, it revealed the pain that many men carry but do not verbalize. They're too afraid to verbalize it, don't have the language to verbalize it, and don't have safe places to be able to express it. I think, and I said, maybe Cam never committed because he didn't or doesn't feel like he could ever live up to his dad. Or he feels like he's already disappointed himself in trying to live up to his father's example. And I could almost hear Cam saying to himself, I didn't do what you did, Dad, but are you still proud of me? He talked about his dad being the most influential person in his life. Cam was looking for the approval and is still looking for the approval of his father. But because of the decisions that Cam has made, he still doesn't feel like he can get it. And he said something else about that he had great examples of marriage in his family, and he was considered the black sheep. He's the only one that's not married. He's the only one in his family that's not married, and he's also the only one that's an NFL superstar. So it's interesting to see what was seen as successful in Cam's eyes, but what he's looking for is validation in his family's eyes, and particularly his father. If I was there, I would have asked Cam, when was the last time your father said he was proud of you? If you go to 45 minutes into the interview, I realized that there were a lot of internalized criticisms of things that Cam has said to himself, and now someone externally was saying it to him. So the words that cut and hurt the deepest are the ones that we've already said to ourselves. And then when somebody externally says those things to us, it's like all of a sudden the airs and the facade that we put on, it feels like it's been ripped away from us. And now we're left naked, having to deal with ourselves and deal with whatever issues that we might be struggling with. I thought about it because it was like Jason Wilson being a man of God, being a man that follows or Yeshua HaMashiach. To follow Christ is a denied life. And Cam has worked hard to receive the validation of women that he never received from his father. And he is deathly worried and afraid of failure, but failure when it counts, failure and fumbling a family. He said his fear of divorce is greater than his desire to get married. And it's funny because each time that he says it, he's real animated about it. He says, my fear of divorce is greater than my desire to get married. What's interesting is that maybe he's with women who love him enough to have children with him, but maybe don't love or respect themselves enough to not be a baby mama. And I think that Dr. Cheyenne Bryant's words cut deep to Cam because she possibly represents what he would like to have. A strong, educated woman with a semblance of self-respect. Cam can have any woman he wants except for the one that he believes won't leave. Cam Newton reminds us of how we can use scripture to dodge responsibility and accountability, to abuse God's grace and his mercy. Is Cam worried about women doing to him what Cam is doing to God? And what is Cam doing? He's abusing his grace, his provision, his patience. We should be able to see ourselves in others, see our imperfections, our flaws, and our commonality in humanity. Mr. Wilson was not there to condemn or convict. He was there to shine a light. And not to shine a light to expose, but to shine a light and to show the direction of where to go. I don't think that Cam Newton trusts himself enough to change. He doesn't trust himself enough to be better. And he's afraid of trying because he hears his father's voice in his head. You're not disciplined. You don't have self-control. And it's a truth about himself in this particular area that is true, that he lacks self-control and discipline when it comes to the opportunity of cracking some new trim. He's leaning on his own understanding instead of trusting in the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of all understanding. Cam made it clear about what he's afraid of. But once again, when you know in the areas in which you are weak, he is strong. So is Cam leaning on to God, or is he leaning on to his own understanding? Is he saying, greater is he that is in me than is he that is in the world? No, he's leaning and relying on his own strength. And instead of bringing his weakness to God, and many of us do this, many of us, instead of crying out to God in those hard moments, in our weak moments, we lean on to our own understanding. Cam is worried about divorce because of his own imperfections, his own proclivities, and his own weaknesses. The weaknesses of lust when he doesn't want to say no. I can relate. I wasn't faithful in any of my relationships prior to being married, and I was worried about being married and not being able to get some strange every now and then. But then I got married and became more afraid of violating God and my covenant than I was worried about my wife. I've had real conversations with my wife about not being worried about dealing with her. I'm worried about having to face God. And this is the longest relationship I've been in where I've been faithful. It is so difficult when you get into situations and you're forced to be a better you. You're forced to dig deeper. You're forced to call up on a higher power that is greater than you to get you through challenges that you never thought that you'd have to face, and challenges that you never thought that you had the power to overcome. In living a denied life, the old sources of joy, happiness, and pleasure aren't as fulfilling as they were before you started having a real relationship with Jesus. There's relief in weakness. There's temporary relief from the pressure of disciplines. I don't have to go deeper with God to fill my emptiness when I resort to lust. I don't have to face my emptiness or unfulfillment when I resort to watching porn. The denied life means I deny my flesh by filling my spirit. The denied life means I go to prayer or I go to my word when I feel myself getting ready to engage in sin. Marriage requires you to be a better person. And Cam doesn't want to give anyone leverage on him that forces him to do something that he doesn't want to do. I can understand that. A man of principle must be set in his convictions. And when you live according to your convictions, your lifestyle exposes hypocrisy and your language eliminates excuses. The highest principles one could ever live by are the principles of Jesus Christ. I love this interview because Jason Wilson wasn't self-righteous. He was convicted and principled. If y'all ever get a chance, go watch Cam Newton and Jason Wilson interview, and you will see exactly what I'm talking about. But I'm here. We got kicked off the plane, so we're just waiting to be allowed back on the plane, trying to head back home. It's just interesting. There's been so many amazing moments in this trip, and there's hiccups every now and then, and you take each hiccup. Now, what they're finna do, have no idea, but they're working on the plane. You know what's crazy? It's a 787. It's a Boeing 787. I've never had issues with a 787. I wonder what's going on with Boeing. But anyways, y'all be blessed. Y'all take care, and I'll talk to y'all later. Jesus loves you, and so do I. Talk to y'all later.